All right. Welcome back to Racial and Ethnic Minorities. Um, this week, we are talking about race and the power of language. Okay? Race and the power of language. Um, we are also talking about, if we want to go ahead and go to the next slide, we are also talking about Essay 3, Native American / Indian topics. Okay. Particularly with that, you are going to have a quiz. So if you look at that slide, it says that you have a quiz available on February 11th. It will cover the reading essay 3. Okay. And it will be 5 to 10 questions related to the reading. So the questions to the quiz will be available under, same as you did with quiz 1, under modules reading quizzes entitled Quiz 2 Native American / Language at midnight on Friday, February 11th. So at midnight on Friday, February 11th, it will come up, it will be available for you. And then you'll have 24 hours until 11:59 that same day, February 11th, to complete the quiz. On a separate Microsoft Word document, you're going to record your answers to the questions. You'll record your answers to the questions. You will go to the assignments link and you will click on reading quizzes, and then you will find the portal that says Quiz 2, Native American Language and the Power of Definition. You're going to upload your answers there again, same way you did quiz 1. No submissions after the deadline will be graded under any circumstances. So if you have questions, reach out to me during my office hours. So hopefully everything went well with quiz 1. I haven't received anything, any emails from anyone saying that they couldn't upload it, or they didn't know what to do or anything like that. So deadline for the quiz, again, is 11:59 p.m. on Friday, February 11th. So be prepared for that. If you have any questions, reach out. Thank you for everyone who's been coming to the office hours. Again, I know that particularly these past 2 weeks have been difficult if you have attempted to, because I've been, again, we're having the search, so I haven't been able to come on all the time because I've been in meetings. This should be the last week, this week of February 7th through the 11th, should be the last week of these meetings. So I will be doing better with office hours. So again, my apologies for that. But if you need to reach out to me, if you want to set up time to meet, again, feel free to email me, feel free to inbox me. I've been regularly responding to those. And if you need to, if you want to set up a time to Zoom, we can do that. I've had some students do that, and we talk about whatever we need to talk about. So please feel free. All right, with that being said, let us go into the topic for today, race and the power of language. So next slide. I want you to think about, think of several derogatory names or phrases and terms that are used to describe a person or people of color. Okay. We don't want to say these terms out loud. Now, I actually remember I have a colleague. She's a white woman colleague who would actually allow for the students to say the terms out loud, and she would write them on the board. When having a lecture similar to this, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. So I don't allow the students to say it out loud. Obviously they will say most of the times, but then there's one particular derogatory term that we all know, we all think, that probably was the one that we all thought about, the first derogatory term towards a group of color. More than likely it might have been the N word, right? That is probably the one that is seen as kind of like um, the standard of what is egregious in terms of what you would call a person of color in the United States. And they don't use that term, obviously, but sometimes I do. When I teach this in person, I don't really allow people to say it, but I say, think about it, right? Because we all have thoughts, right? And either we've heard these terms before, or we thought about these terms, or sometimes we may have even said these terms in the past. So there are these terms that are used to describe people of color that are derogatory. And we'll go into the spectrum in terms of how derogatory in a second. But the reason why we won't say these words is because they are taboo. Saying these words is taboo. Saying these words is saying these words, it is inappropriate to do that. It can be offensive, and it is illegal, right? Depending on the word, it is illegal, and depending on the context. Reason why I say that is because sometimes something may can be considered a hate crime if you're doing a crime and then you're using an inappropriate racial derogatory word while committing that crime. That can be considered a hate crime, and then that can increase, maybe the number of years you receive, or it can increase the harshness of the punishment. However, there are other words and phrases that we may say that may not be explicitly racist, but it can still evoke some similar feelings, right? So sometimes we may not have to say the N word, or we may not have to say, very, very explicitly racist terms for it to still be inappropriate, for it to still be something that brings up harm and brings up a feeling of inferiority in a group of people. But we see these words a lot, right? We see these words a lot. We hear them on the news. We hear them come out of the mouths of people, from news reporters to sports analysts to even presidents and political leaders. Sometimes you probably, and you can tell me any words, or you can say any of those words that may be said in public that may be accepted in society, but that still evoke a similar feeling of inferiority in minority groups. So you can think of those words, and some of the words you may be thinking about are colored, right? The term colored is sometimes used. Also, the term illegal alien is a word that oftentimes we will hear to describe someone who is an immigrant. But then also a lot of times the image that we get when we think of illegal alien generally is a person of Latinx descent, right? Oftentimes we don't think of illegal aliens as being someone who is European, right? Or maybe someone who's from an Asian country. But there is this kind of image of this dark, evil person from a Latinx country coming to the United States to take over, and doing it illegally, trying to have the benefits of citizenship while being a so-called illegal alien. We've also heard the term thug, right? Particularly as it pertains to Black men. He's a thug, he's acting thuggish. And this term thug, it was especially salient during in the 90s and then the early 2000s, especially with the growth of hip hop and hip hop culture. And it was a way to describe any Black male that characterized this culture, right? It could have been a Black male that was not a so-called thug or a person who engaged in unlawful activity. Um, it could have been one who met the standards of middle class, right? Educated, talked properly, so-called. But if they did anything or said anything that did not fall into the ideas of white traditions or white acceptance, then it would be considered thuggish. I don't know if any of you all keep up with basketball or like basketball. I'm a big basketball fan, and so I grew up during a time where, while Michael Jordan was obviously, the standard, the top person, probably, still is to this day when you think historically, who is the player that everybody um, compares themselves to, it's Michael Jordan, Then of course you have people like obviously Kobe Bryant, um, um, LeBron James, you have all these other great players. And during my time, while Michael Jordan, he was even still playing, he was, he's kind of old. He was kind of an older generation. And the player that we all wanted to be like when we stepped on the court and when we played basketball and when we played in games and who we wanted to dress like and who we wanted to mimic was Allen Iverson. Allen Iverson was our Michael Jordan, right? He was our hero. And one of the reasons why our generation really liked Michael Jordan, very similar to maybe your generation, or maybe a few years older than you or whoever, may like Steph Curry. I know Steph Curry's kind of the guy for this generation in terms of basketball, but in my generation was Allen Iverson. And one of the reasons why we liked him was because he was not only a great player, but he was very unafraid of how he presented himself. He presented himself in the way that he wanted to. He wore braids and he had tattoos and he wore chains and he listened to rap music and he wore Jordans he wore Reebok. I think he had a deal with Reebok. He wore, sneakers, and he didn't always necessarily dress up before the games in the shirt and tie. And he just represented what a lot of the young people, particularly young Black males, looked like and felt like during that time, right? Again, this is at the continued development of hip hop culture. And so a lot of times with basketball players, they would have to look a certain way and, be someone who looked professional. And Allen Iverson said, I don't care about that. He looked the way he wanted to, but they couldn't really do anything because he was such a great player, right? He put up the points. He sold the tickets. He almost took his team to the championship. I don't think he had never won a championship. And he stayed with Philly, his entire Philadelphia 76ers, his entire career. He just represented what we as black males who like basketball and play basketball, what we, who we would like to be or what we look like. Well, one of the and actually, if you look at the Colin Kaepernick documentary, it's like a show on Netflix. He talks about growing up during that time, and he talks about how Allen Iverson was a big inspiration for him to just kind of go against the grain, go on the unbeaten path, and just do what it is he wanted to do while still be a great player. Um, uh, what oftentimes you would hear from sports analysts when describing him and when describing the basketball players that were coming up under him, they will often describe them as thugs. They will often describe them as having gangsterish clothing, right? And this would be offensive to our generation. This would be offensive to many people because they were describing them as something that they were not, right? These people were not necessarily perpetual criminals or bad people, This was just their culture, and this was who they were, and this is how they like to dress. And this was a big deal in the NBA all the way up until, and this is not a history of basketball or anything, but that would be an interesting class to teach, though. History of basketball or sociology of basketball. That'd be interesting. All the way up until I think it was like the 2004 Malice in the Palace and the big fight between Indiana Pacers and Detroit Pistons. They have a whole documentary on that too. It's you can Google that if you want to. But I say all that to say that that is a term that was used a lot, right, to describe Black men who did not fall in line with white acceptance, thugs and gangsters, right? And so again, when most people think about racism, a lot of times what it's thought about is the overt actions of burning a cross, refusing service to somebody based on their based on how they look, using the explicit language. But the civil rights movement helped to ensure that the state supported victims of these crimes. So it didn't say that these things would not exist, but if these things did exist, if you burned a cross in somebody's yard, if you refuse service to somebody based on race, that there would be some type of compensation for that crime, that there would be some kind of recompense for that crime. But those are not the only ways in which racism can play out. Racism also plays out in language, okay? It plays out in perceptions of identity, all right? And all of these things work together to help sometimes reinforce race. What I would like for you to do is I would like for you to click this link, and this is a comedy routine. I want you to watch about half of it. And then you can watch the whole thing if you want, but the main part that he talks about is in like the first half. And then after that, we can click back on to this link or click back onto the lecture and we'll continue. All right. So what concepts from your reading can you find in this routine? All right, what do you see that he talks about in the routine that you also saw in the reading? One of the things that he discusses is this notion of how race and language plays out even in typing, right? If you are a person of Latinx descent and you want to write something that rolls the R, or you want to write something that may have an accent over it, and sometimes you can't, that can affect how you can display your ideas and your thoughts. So even in the technology, there can be a certain level of bias, right? Even our technology is very Eurocentric, right? There can even be ideas around bias and racial bias within certain communities based on language. If you know a language or if you don't. If you are of Latinx descent, but you cannot speak both English and Spanish fluently, you may be ostracized from your Latinx community, or you may be viewed as an outsider from your Latinx community, right? So these are just some of the ways in which, but then if you speak Spanish fluently, but you don't speak English that well, the less likely you are to speak English well, then the more likely you are to be ostracized in a country that you're trying to integrate into, right? You may not receive a job, or you may not receive benefits, or you may be looked at as an illegal alien, right? If you do not speak the language as well as someone would want you to speak it. Sometimes people who come to this country end up getting rid of their accents, or they try to suppress their accent as much as possible in order to integrate into the ways of the country. So when a person asks a perceived person of color, "What are you?" How does that reinforce a racial bias? And you say, "What are you?" How does that reinforce racial bias? Um, Sometimes when you ask a person, what are they? Um, it it brings up and it allows for someone to question your authenticity, right? You question your authenticity. Um, you question a person's authenticity. You question uh, if a person is who you think they are, and it allows for a person to be put into a box if they're asked, "What are you?" It asks what is one's identity, but then it says who gets to decide that person's identity. So the decision of identity in many ways has been politicized. You have a one drop rule. You have the one drop rule during slavery, where if you had one drop of black blood in you, then you were considered to be a black person, and therefore you were subject to slavery and subject to your body being commodified for the sake of capital. Passing is another way in which identity has been politicized. You have people who were of color, people who were black, but they were light enough to come off as a person who's white and receive the benefits of being white. It's also been politicized when you have a mixed race president. President Obama was a mixed race gentleman. In 1990, he was heralded as the first African American editor of the Harvard Law magazine or the Harvard Law Review. But then in 2008, when he was running for president, many people did not want to say he was black. They wanted to say he was mixed. And so it was of benefit to white society to have a first black editor of the Harvard Law Review. It made society look good and progressive, but not, we don't want to be so progressive that we have a black president, though. We want him to be a mixed race president because we still want to claim the little, the whiteness that he has in him. And eventually, President Obama kind of squashed all this by saying, obviously, people are going to say what they think I am, or call me mixed race, call me black, call me whatever. But I have always, and he said this publicly on an ABC interview, all my life I have been, while I accept and engage with both the black side of my family and the white side of my family, and I notice the importance that both sides have played in who I am. I have always been treated as a black person in the United States. That's how I have always been perceived, in both ways that have been positive and ways that have been negative. And so I have always identified as a black person. And after that, everything was kind of squashed at that point. So that being a mixed race president, right? It deals with identity politics, Indians versus Native Americans, and what we call the native people of Turtle Island, or one of the original names of the United States, is also a part of the politicization of identity as it pertains to race. And so even going further, you have questions around what people, when you say, who are you or what are you, it's also getting into the binary of exonyms versus endonyms, right? So an exonym is something that other people will call you, but an endonym is something that you call yourself, right? Or something that your people call themselves. So some examples of an exonym versus an endonym would be this. The term Latino, Latina, Latinx is a term that is an endonym, right? That is a term that has been accepted by that particular group of people. Hispanic is an exonym, right? So that is a term that has come from the outside. And while Hispanic may not necessarily be a pejorative, right? It may not necessarily be an out and out offensive term, according to some people. It still is not the appropriate, or it is not the preferred
it may not be the preferred term by some people within that group in terms of what they would like to be called. Another example would be Oriental versus Asian, right? Oriental is a term of a very older term that was used to describe people from Asian countries. That is an exonym, and while that may not be extremely egregious or extremely offensive, there is some level of offense to calling people of Asian descent Oriental, right? Instead, calling them Asian or Asian American is better, right? And then the best would be calling them whatever it is that they are, wherever it is that they're from, or however they identify. Sometimes you may not know until you get to know a person, and then you can say, oh, this person is Vietnamese, or this person is from the Philippines. But if you may not know, or you're describing them, then you may know that in general they're from Asian countries, right? The term colored or Negro was a term that was given to Black people. That was not a term that they had accepted. The term Black was kind of, and even the term Black at one point was an exonym, and Black people have now, during the 1960s, definitely brought power back to that word through the Black Power movement. And then African American is probably the most recent term that Black people within their community, or within our community, have decided to call ourselves and said, this is how we would like to be defined. Now, you have some people who like Black, some people who prefer Black or African American, prefer either one. But, you know, those other terms, colored or Negro or whatever, it may not be as egregious, or it may not be as bad or as offensive as the N-word. Is still those terms that don't necessarily sit right with a lot of people within that particular community. That's the difference between exonyms and endonyms. But then you also have terms in which we have to consider gender, right? So why do we use Latinx instead of Latino or Latina, or use Latin and then the at symbol with the A or the O around it? Why do we use that term sometimes? And the reason why we use that term is because we want to include those Latinx people that may not identify as a Latino or a Latina. So we want to ensure that transgender or queer Latinx people are also considered. So you may have some that may not fit into the Latino, Latina, man, woman, male, female binary. And so they too are included in this racial identification, right? So language is very, very important. Okay, let us get to the next slide. Oh, here we go. So, a lot of times when you call, again, when we're talking about language and you call a person white, that is pretty clear, right? If you say this person is white, we have an idea of what that means in our head. White means blank, white means white, blood. If we say black, black means black. We have an idea, we have a history, we have a context around that. But oftentimes when we say all people of color, that just means non-white. And then when we say that a person is non-white, how are we then reinforcing race and racial bias? If we say white and non-white. Well, sometimes what that does is it others everyone who is non-white, and then it normalizes white and makes whites or whiteness the reference category. And then white becomes the standard of normality. Whiteness becomes the truth in which everything else is compared to. And that's not necessarily an ideal kind of canon in which we would use to judge our identity politics. Does that make sense? So if you say, well, this person is non-white and this person is white, then even when you think of a non-white person, you're just thinking of the fact that this person is not white and then this person is white. So then whiteness is still central in both perceptions of identity. And so even when we call a person non-white, a lot of times that is what comes into play. And there have been some people, even in quantitative studies, that have said, you know what, I don't want to make whiteness the reference category, or males, male and non-male, English speaking and non-English speaking. I don't know if I want to make these traditional categories of power. I don't know if I want to keep reinforcing that in these comparisons. So a person may say black and non-black, and that just makes black the reference category, and then anybody non-black is othered. It still encompasses everybody, whether you are this or not. So sometimes people may do that, right? So again, language is very, very important. What are the terms associated with white or whiteness? Right, we have terms that we might use when we are talking about white people. Sometimes it might be Caucasian or European. Oftentimes when or even American, really good example. Recently, I forgot his name. I think he's the Senate Minority Leader. Can't remember his name. But he recently said that African Americans are voting at a rate similar to Americans, I believe, or Black people are voting at a rate similar to Americans, as if to suggest that African Americans are not Americans. So what it does is it again creates this politics of identity in our mind to say that, you can Google it, it was on social media and all over the place, it went viral. And it was just to, again, suggest that when we think about Americans, oftentimes people don't think about Black people or people of color as Americans. They think about white people, white, middle America, husband, wife, kids, dog, beautiful house, picket fence. All right. All of these other identities around race and gender and class, oftentimes they're not thought about as being part of the American identity. It sounds good. It can be marketed that way if it's necessary for the growth of the country, but deep down, many people may not feel that way. Which is why having a president of a different race, and President Obama brought out this notion that the first family is actually a family that looks very different from all of the first families in the past. And now the first family, the representation of the American family, was a Black family. But many people still don't see anyone who is non-white as a part of the American identity. So oftentimes whiteness or even Americanness is whiteness. Even if you go to other countries. I remember the first time I visited Tanzania in Africa, East Africa, and they were surprised that I was from the United States because they did not know, some people didn't know that Black people lived in the United States. This was in 2006, but they didn't know that Black people lived in the United States. And so they said, oh, he's an Mzungu. They call me Mzungu, and Mzungu is a white man. So they said, oh, you're a white man, or you're from the land of the white man. And they called me white man, not because clearly I'm Black, but they said you are from where white people come from, where white people rule, right? And that's where you are from, so you are them. You may not be them in the physical sense, but you are them in terms of your mentality. You are them in terms of how you're raised and how you're educated. You have the mind of the white man, right? Very interesting exchange I had with the brothers and sisters over there. I would highly suggest people if you don't get a chance to, or if you get a chance to travel anywhere, I would highly suggest you do that. It absolutely opens your mind to so many different things. So again, white and whiteness and even Americanness is there are all these identity politics related to that. And so language is this very complicated structure that is connected to an even more complex history and psychology and social experience of a person or a group of people. And honestly, this is why it's so difficult to create a solution that applies to all people of all experiences. And this is why when we're talking about language, so some of you may be asking or may have asked in the past, well, if saying this is right and saying this is wrong, and I thought that saying black was okay, but now I got to say African American, or I thought I could say Oriental, now I can't say colored, I can say people of color and not say non-white versus white, and I'm confused, Professor Grant, what do I do? Like I'm not trying to be offensive, it's just difficult, it's complicated. Yeah, it is. Language is complicated and it evolves. As people, it evolves. And so as you learn, as you grow, we have to be patient with each other, with language. Now language around she, he, her, him, pronouns, they are becoming more popular. And as we are evolving as a society, then we have to adjust our language in that way. Right? There has to be patience on the people who are where the changing of the language is for them, so that they are not oppressed. But then there also has to be a push and a willingness to learn and grow and change from the people out in the outside or outside of that group to say, hey, we are willing to make sure that we call you whatever it is that you want to be called and that we do not offend you purposely. And if that means we need to learn and change our language, then that's what it means. At the end of the day, though, someone might say, well, honestly, we don't know. We don't know what to call a person just by looking at them. You may not know exactly what nationality, what ethnicity, how they identify. So you do the best you can, but specificity is preferred. So if you meet somebody, let's say that I'm Kenyan, but you didn't know that if you saw me. So all you know is you might say, okay, he is of African descent. We know that. He's Black. He might be African American. And so not until we have a conversation, and then I say, well, actually, I'm Kenyan, I'm from Kenya. Then from that point on, you would say, okay, he is Kenyan. That's specific. And then even that may not be as specific because in Kenya, they have different tribes, right? So I could be of one tribe or another tribe, right? But as specific as you can get as you get to know a person or people, that is how you want to approach language the best you can, right? And we're not gonna always get it right, but the attempt at getting it right is very important. All right, now we're going to move on and talk more about language, particularly in Essay 8. So language is inextricably linked to race and racialization in the United States, right? And so we understand and construct language based on perceived race, based on social position, we perceive race and social position based on the language that a person speaks. So very similar to what I just stated, and probably the best example of this is the speaking of Spanish. One of the greatest myths is that Spanish is spoken by undocumented poor immigrants from Latin America. This is an idea that some people of color have, some minorities have, but also many white people have. So language is proletarianized. Spanish is seen as the language of the proletariat, of the poor, of the working class. And then it's racialized because it said, oh, well, it's only spoken amongst the poor, the immigrants of this particular group. But Spanish and language is bigger than race and class. It's even bigger than race and class. right? Historically, Spanish has been a part of the United States for hundreds of years. But Spanish and Spanish speakers are oftentimes are viewed as unwilling to be American, which reifies anti-immigrant and anti-immigrant ideas. So a lot of times, well, when we look at historically, what parts of Central America were a part of the United States, if you look back at it historically, the northern part of Mexico and the northern part of Central America was a part of the United States. So technically, Spanish was a part of the United States for a long time. And then eventually, it, because of wars and things of that nature and the annexation of certain states, it broke off. All right. So, but then also when we think about language, there are these anti-immigrant ideas. And then even within anti-immigrant ideas, you also have which immigrants are accepted and which are not. Sometimes between racial groups, like Europeans are often accepted as immigrants or Canadians more so than Mexicans or people from Latinx countries. So you also have that type of bias, but then you also have intra-racial anti-immigrant ideas, where you have people who may speak a similar language, maybe not in the exact same way, but a similar language, but then depending on how close they are to whiteness, it determines how people feel about them or perceive them. So for example, in Mexico, the language that is spoken is Spanish. In Spain, the language that is spoken is Spanish. But how does society view Mexicans versus someone from Spain or Portugal? Right? So let's look at these two links. Let's look at this link. You click on this link in Spain and click on that. You can pause the video, come back. So if you look at how people viewed Spain, one of the first messages that you see is, if you scroll and maybe even click that first link up there, look at it, look at Reddit, look at all of the ways in which it's talked about. One of the first messages is it's a beautiful country and rich in culture, food, and all these different things. You have some people who say, colonizers, they colonized certain groups, but not necessarily negative in terms of their culture. Outside of them being conquerors, which some people may see that as a good thing. If you conquered, then you're the best, you're the most powerful, right? So, but outside of that, there's not really a deficit that people look at in terms of someone who's from Spain and their culture. The culture is kind of, not necessarily deified, but erased, right? In terms of popularity and acceptance. Now click on this link that says Mexico. And look at the terms that are used to describe Mexico. And now that you've done that, you see people think about drugs, the cartel, illegal immigrants, right? Workers, not educated people. Now, Spanish is spoken in both of those countries, but depending on how close one is to Europe versus one might be to the native culture or the native people prior to the Columbus era, prior to the age of European expansion, one might say, or one might appreciate Spain or Portugal or Spanish culture versus Mexican culture, or someone from Mexico. So oftentimes when we talk about language and when we talk about the politicization of language and identity politics around language, it's less about speaking Spanish and more about the racial narratives associated with the people speaking the Spanish. It's not just about that they speak Spanish, because then sometimes somebody may go to Spain and say, oh, the language is so beautiful. Look at them over there. Spain is in Europe. It's a part of the European, part of the European expansion. But a Mexican speaking Spanish may be looked at as being someone who doesn't want to learn English. So it's not always, so again, essentially what we're saying is that language is racialized, essentially, right? Next slide. Is Spanish more important than English? Let's look at page 88. Right, let's read page 88. Is Spanish more important than English? Let us see. All right, so let's look at the very bottom of the second, of the first paragraph, that first section, where it says of all Hispanic surveyed. Of all Hispanic surveyed, 38% reported being Spanish dominant, 38% reported being bilingual, and 24% reported being English dominant. By the third generation and higher, 1% reported being Spanish dominant, 29% reported being bilingual, and 69% reported being English dominant. Given that these data parallel generational linguistic assimilation of European immigrant groups, where do dominant beliefs about Latinos linguistic use and attitudes come from? So when you think about it, as a person starts to become more and more integrated into a culture, oftentimes what you happen is that their native or their original language begins to get desensitized, and then is spoken less and less, right? But many people think, and there's this prejudice about Spanish-speaking people or Latino, Latinx people, that they don't want to learn the language. They're always speaking Spanish. They don't want to integrate into American culture, and that's not necessarily the case. Right? That's not necessarily the case. In fact, the more generations a person is Americanized, the less likely it is that they would be Spanish dominant. Okay. But white middle class English is a core component of US nationalism. Right? It's important in US nationalism. Oh, one part I forgot to talk about in the last slide was for you to click that link, but that link, you can click it if you want to and look at that video. But it is basically, it shows where these hierarchies around language come from. Sometimes where it comes from, and sometimes it comes from the top, the president or the political leader or the leader of the country at the time. And that video shows President Trump spewing these very negative ideas around Latinx people and language. Why? Because white middle class English is seen as a very core component of US nationalism. And we see that in the media and how people are supposed to speak, even people who are Americans, people who have US citizenship, US identity. But then a certain type of language is necessary for success. White middle class English is a core component of US nationalism, which is seen in our politics and in our education. The type of English, the type of language, the type of words that we want people to say and use. So oftentimes we see that speaking Spanish determines who has access to what rights. If you speak Spanish a lot, or you speak Spanish dominantly and you may not speak English very well or as fluently, you may not get a job. They probably won't say it's because you speak Spanish or you don't speak English as well as a person may want you to. because that person could be sued, but they may say it's for other reasons, but that could be it. But then it's hard to assess. You have to prove it in a court of law. But speaking Spanish determines who has access to what rights, how a person is perceived, right? And then how easy it is for a person to navigate life in the United States. Okay. So let's look at some of the sociological theories about race and language, right? On the next slide, let's look at some of the theories around this. Number one, Joe Fagan, who is the writer of Racist America and one of the contemporary authors and scholars on systemic racism, says that whiteness is embedded in the political, historical, economic, and the linguistic formation of the United States. So even as language is being created and accepted, whiteness is a part of that. It's very much racialized. The language that white people use becomes central to the formation of discussion and linguistic expression in this country. And we just talked about that. White people determine what phrases are okay and are necessary and are cool. Now, also, culture, popular culture, also has a push in that as well. I will never forget when, again, I'm just talking about my childhood. All I can do is come from my experiences. But I remember as a child growing up and being in high school in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, there was a song, some of you may know it, some of you may not. But there was a song called Bling Bling, right? And it was popular among this group, Cash Money Records. And it will play in the cafeteria, and we would watch the video as we were eating during lunchtime before our afternoon classes. And so they would play the video, and it was a part of hip hop culture. We would say bling bling and bling bling. For those who may not know what that phrase means, it is just a way of showing off a person's jewelry. So the idea that when jewelry sparkles, there is this idea that the sound it makes is bling bling. So if a person has a very expensive necklace, chain, bracelets, whatever, rings on, then it is said to be bling. It is said to make that sound, right? Bling bling. So when a person says, "Oh, you have a lot of bling on," that just means you have on a lot of jewelry, or your bling is shining. That means your jewelry is very bright. It was street language. It was very unpopular in mainstream society, but the popularization of that song and the popularization of those artists like Lil Wayne and Birdman and all these different people made the term more and more acceptable. And then eventually, some years later, that term you can now actually find in the dictionary, in the American dictionary. The term bling is there, and it has a definition and everything. So language can also be pushed by street culture, popular culture, the culture of the ne'er-do-wells, the culture of the resistors, the culture of the resistance can also push language, because when they come up with language, right? Black people, Latinx people, people from the culture that may be considered cool or popular or hip hop or whatever, sometimes that language then gets so accepted by the masses that now the mainstream can't do anything but accept it. And then that then becomes mainstream. And then oftentimes when it becomes mainstream, then it's not as cool in the streets anymore, because the whole culture of the streets is to go against the mainstream. So it sometimes happens like that. But I say all that to say that in general, though, whiteness is still very much a part of how language is embedded and formed in the United States. But then Eduardo Bonilla Silva says that languages perceive, or certain languages have this perceived cultural deficiencies in it in terms of people of color. So there are perceived cultural deficiencies in people of color based on language. For example, certain phrases can't be expressed in English. I had a friend who visited South Africa and she was trying to explain something and they said, we don't understand. We don't have anything in our language that says this because that's not part of our beliefs. I remember when I took Greek and Hebrew in college because I studied religion. And so one of the things that we learned in the Greek is that there's no such thing as, there's no past tense for love. There's no such thing as I loved someone. It's either you love someone or you don't. But you can't love somebody in the past and then not love them now, because love is continual, love is forever. Once you love someone, you love them forever. You can't say I was in love or I did love, but I don't anymore. So there was no such thing as a past tense for love. But in the American context, there is. But in the early Greek, there was not, because nobody perceived love as being something that stopped. So that's an example of how certain phrases can't be expressed in certain languages because it is not a part of their belief system, right? Leo Chavez also talks about something called the Latino threat. And what he says is that oftentimes people look at Latinx people in these three kind of major ways, in these three ways, and how they are trying to threaten what is best for the country. And he says that one way is by claiming that Latinx people are trying to reclaim part of the United States as theirs. Basically, they're trying to take over. They want to take over the US. The second is that they don't want to assimilate. They don't want to become part of American culture, American identity. Right? They don't want to be part of the US. They want to take over and still maintain their own culture. And then lastly, they want to gain power over the United States through mass migration and reproduction. They keep coming over here. They keep having babies over here. Their population is rising. They're trying to take over. And this is what Leo Chavez says is part of the Latino threat, right? And this is why there is this fear of race and fear of Latinx people and fear of this Spanish-speaking language from certain groups because of this overall kind of theory around the Latino threat. And so what we end up seeing is that this is part of a larger discussion around what we call linguistic terrorism. And linguistic terrorism are the ways in which people and groups use language to maintain hierarchies based on race, class, and gender. They use language by silencing certain people's languages, by creating a hierarchy based on language to then determine what a person's race is, which will then determine how well they're able to move up in class. But then it is also used to extract the identities of gender, like what we talked about when we talked about Latinx versus Latino or Latina. So linguistic terrorism is just another way of perpetuating oppression in a lot of ways. And so we have to be careful with our language. We have to be sure that we do our best to use the language and use the names when we are referring to people so that we are not perpetuating linguistic terrorism and we are not perpetuating or using language as a vehicle for further segregation in terms of identity politics. Not separation, because separation is okay. People can be separated or be different, but segregation is when you have the hierarchies. And we have to be very careful in how we do that on an individual level, but then also how we use that in terms of our in terms of the larger structures in our society, how that can be reinforced in the media and in our education system and in politics, etc. All right, so let us go to the last slide, which is your assignment. So you are to do the activity linguistic autobiography, which is on page 96 in your book. You must provide an answer to all the questions in your section, and I really look forward to reading your detailed responses. Okay, so you're going to answer the questions based on your identity. So if you identify as Black, then you will answer number 1. If you identify as white, you will answer number 2. If you identify as Latino, Latina, you will answer number 3, and so on. Your assignment must be 2 to 3 pages, double space, Times New Roman, 12 font. It can be more if you have more, but it can be less. And I'm gonna grade you based on the details and based on how you use. Be sure to use concepts from the reading or lecture in your answers. Okay. And this assignment is due February 11th at 11:59. Okay, February 11th at 11. So good. If you need to reach me, email me, inbox me, come to the office hours. If they're open, again, sorry for that this week. But please, please, please email me, inbox me. And if you want to meet via Zoom, we can set up that time. Have a great week, great weekend, great day, great week, great weekend. And you will see me soon.